Welcome everyone. This is Lemko with History. Today I have Tomash on. He is a Rusin from Transcarpathia, but right now he lives in the United Kingdom. Tomash, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? What kind of content you do, things like that?
Hi, well, I'm a linguist by education, but right now I just started my vlog, which is just a more casual thing for now. But I think there will be more language-related content going forward as well. And I also have a Twitter account, which is this day in Rusin history. And I think the username is Rusin_today. And that's just about it. I also admin for Rusin Wikipedia at the moment, but just
Which,
here and there smaller things.
yeah, I mean, you do a lot of content that I think is desperately needed because, for example, me and Mihail, we do almost completely Rusin focused things where, for example, you're starting the vlogs, which is just, just being Rusiv is just kind of a passive thing, just content that's in Rusin. But then I always appreciate the Twitter account just because I don't have the skills to do that. And it's always nice learning about new people. I mean, you're one of the few Rusins from Transcarpathia that really do make content. How long have you known you were Rusin? I know you and me have talked about before, just for the audience to know.
Well, I guess since always basically because in my case it was already all figured out in my family, and I've learned a lot through that. But then just growing up, I became more interested in that and started doing more self-learning. But there wasn't any sort of big discovery moment for me. I just got gradually more interested in it and did more reading, more of my own research, and that kind of uh, aligned well with my other interests as well.
But you didn't actually speak Rusin when you were younger, though, right? If I remember correctly, like you didn't know Rusin a whole lot, or have you always known how to speak it?
Well, kind of yes and no. I guess I knew a lot of it passively, but I haven't actively spoken it until very recently. So I grew up in Uzhhorod, which is just in a city setting. It is quite different. So how it happens usually with children is that at a certain age, they don't follow as much their parents in various behavior, including language, and just look more towards their peers. And in Uzhhorod, sort of my friend circle, we just all spoke Ukrainian. So that was just a generational change in my family in general. So it's the same with my cousins I grew up with. And in my family, they spoke a lot of Rusin, a lot of Ukrainian as well. So they would just mix languages often. And I just learned passively, and I was quite shy to use it actively, to be honest. So
Mm.
I always thought that it's not that I might get judged because I possibly don't sound like a native speaker who speaks it a lot.
Mm.
So eventually it did help me when Mihal started making his own content, and we just kind of reached out to each other, just connected on these sort of platforms, and he opened a chat for people to just speak Rusin. And for the most part, it's native speakers, but it was useful to me as a place where I knew I could comfortably speak and not be judged. And just over time, I realized that my skills are a lot better than I have judged before, probably.
Mm.
So right now, it's a bit difficult making content sometimes, not necessarily because I'm not as good as other speakers, but because this is the sort of content that didn't really exist before. So when you're writing scripts or any sort of text, it's kind of like inventing an entirely new genre. So
New
there are a lot of,
frontier. Yeah.
yeah, there are a lot of aids you can use, but it's since you don't read a lot in Rusin, you don't just have these automatic writing cliches that you could get in other languages. So you have to work a bit harder and get a bit more creative. But I
Mm.
think it really pays off.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, so from what I've heard at least, Uzhhorod is a very non-Rusin speaking place. But once you go more east, like Hust and places like that, it's much more open, correct? Like, for example, would people find it strange if you just openly talked in Rusin and like maybe like Mukachevo or Hust?
I think it just all depends on the social circle exactly and
Mm.
what sort of people you talk to. So in Uzhhorod as well, you can find people. Well, a lot of the times these are people who just arrived from somewhere else or who have not lived there the entire lives. So it just all depends on the circle. If you speak to anyone in Rusin, I think they won't necessarily be surprised, but in various places that of course just has different implications. So like in just Rusin has a lot of dialects as probably quite well known. So people would just be able to surmise like where you're coming from based on your dialect. And in a certain place, you can maybe sound more like a local, and in a certain place, you'd be more of an outsider. And in Uzhhorod as well, you can try speaking it, but people might be surprised that sometimes. I haven't tried that. So since I don't live there anymore, but I know Mihal has spoken about trying to just speak Rusin more on an everyday basis in Uzhhorod. And from what I understand, the reactions have been quite positive.
And so this interest in linguistics and things like that, where did that kind of passion come from? Because, you know, fully speaking Rusin is a very new thing. Were there any other languages that you were mostly focused on for that? Or what kind of background was that for?
Well, it started out as just being interested in the theory of it all and just the theoretical parts. And as I said, my sort of interest in Rusin things aligned with that well, because I think that was also what started my interest in linguistics. So I just noticed that my family, it is from different Rusin areas, so they speak different dialects. And I was just noticing that they have these differences in their speech, just regionally based, and that got me more curious about it. So I just started reading up about Slavic languages, the history of how they evolved, and that in turn helped me learn languages better and understand Rusin better, understand other Slavic languages better. So I have been learning a few. So I've lived in Prague for 5 years, and just out of that experience, my Czech is fairly good, but I'm also okay with Slovak, Slovene. So these are the languages that I enjoyed learning as well. So it makes it easier for me to understand everything, to systematize everything. And I guess it's kind of ironic that after all that experience, I only started speaking Rusin this year more actively, but it's all just coming full circle, I guess.
How was the university in Transcarpathia? Because I know you did a few years there at the start. How was the education in Transcarpathia?
Well, I don't want to be too critical, but there was a reason, I guess, why I wanted to go study elsewhere as well. Well, it's
Yeah,
just
just be honest, you know. Yeah, just be honest with it. Yeah.
I guess like in every place, probably you have, if you're looking for better education, you would be looking for the places like the capital or the biggest, most developed cities. And if you're staying in the province, it probably won't be on the same level. So that was more of my experience. I just don't know. I wasn't really engaged with it, and I don't think it was really engaging, to be honest. And well, just it's not very flexible, unfortunately. People also don't, when they come to a specific program and they might be looking elsewhere, they might not necessarily respond positively to that. There's not a really good system in place that encourages changing your program or looking elsewhere. So when I was in Prague, there were some people who would be changing their majors after half a year or the first year, and it's made quite easily. But I think in Ukraine in general, the mentality is that a lot of parents would have also is if you've started one specific school program, you should be finishing that. And well, that was kind of my experience. I think I made the right decision just looking elsewhere, and my program in Ukraine wasn't related to linguistics, so just going from that, going into something that was going to linguistics major, it just was a lot better for me because at least that was aligned with my hobbies and all.
Do you ever see yourself moving back to Transcarpathia, or do you think being in the UK is a more permanent thing for you?
I think I'll be staying here for a long while at the very least. So I already have a family here, and I don't think I think just moving back, there would be various issues like maybe the language barrier for my spouse and things like that. But it's just, I don't know. I think it's a really comfortable place to live in. So specifically Uzhhorod, at least, that's the only place in Transcarpathia I lived in. So at various times in the past, I've considered maybe moving back, but I just don't know. I think after a while living abroad, you kind of get on a different wavelength. And now when I think about possibly moving back, I'm just a bit lost at what specifically I would be doing, how that all would be organized. And at the moment, just I understand this place where I'm staying quite a bit more.
And so when is the last time you visited Transcarpathia?
That would have been summer 2019. Yeah, so before
that's pretty
lockdown.
close. Yeah, pretty close. Pretty much a
Yeah.
year ago. I mean, what differences do you see, for example, maybe when you're studying in Transcarpathia versus now, or maybe like from, after 5 years in Prague and going there? Like, do you see specifically more being Rusin, like, do you see things are more open there, or do you just, or has it pretty much stayed the same in many ways?
It's hard for me to tell, but I think maybe there have been some changes. The biggest change that I'm seeing is just the generational change. And you can see that just with all the things popping out, not just in Transcarpathia, but there as well. And more people just being involved, doing various things related to just the Rusin theme overall. So I think that's very refreshing, and positively, and possibly any changes that might be coming would probably be on the back of that. So that's probably the most major thing. Otherwise, I don't know. I'd imagine that sort of changes in public opinion, they would only come just under the influence of certain events. And other than that, I don't know if it's been very eventful, this.
Fair enough. Yeah. Now I have a completely side question, but this dynamic has always fascinated me. But so the Hungarians that live in Transcarpathia, they mostly live in the southwestern corner, the plains area. You know this. I'm just telling the audience. But how much do they interact with people in Uzhhorod or people or Rusins up in the mountains and stuff like that? Is it two very isolated communities? Would you say? Or would you say that there's a lot of there's a lot of connection there?
I say in general, possibly more isolated. There are certain Rusin areas that are closer to that region. So one person that I'm aware of, just thanks to all the Rusin internet sphere, comes from a village that's actually surrounded by Hungarian-speaking villages. So I'd imagine their experience might be quite different. So possibly if they're physically neighboring, there would be more interactions there. But generally, I think people interact more when they come to bigger places, the towns and cities. So in Uzhhorod, there is a Hungarian community, and just living there, growing up there, you definitely meet people from that group. And I don't know, I think the interaction is fairly positive. Just going off what just I noticed in my family growing up and just in people's interactions is that there is a certain local identity of possibly just people who are indigenous to the area or just who've been living there for a few generations at least, to sort of see themselves as very similar and sharing like traditions, cultural values, things like that. So I
It
think
does.
that could
It
include both Rusyns and Hungarians.
I have noticed that a little bit. Like I've had like Hungarians from Transcarpathia or something like that. Like they kind of describe it as like kind of a Transcarpathian thing. Like it's almost, even though that they're not Rus and they feel very connected to the area. I'm not, I don't know how widespread that is, but that does seem to be a real theme. Like for example, that one friend that we both know, how he describes himself as Transcarpathian, even though he's not Rusin. So it's very, I don't know. It's just a very interesting dynamic. It seems like there's more like some like all-encompassing regional identity that people don't really talk about a whole lot. So
They talk about it a bit more in Transcarpathia because a lot of the time they won't say Rusin, but they will say Transcarpathian. On the other hand, that's often just a replacement for Rusin. And when they say that, they actually mean Rusin. They don't necessarily mean Hungarian, but it is also just, there is a certain, I want to say, I don't know, discourse or narrative about Transcarpathia as a multicultural region, and that's something people stress a lot, and that's something that is in people's conscience. But of course, it all can vary. Just with regards to possibly a separate regional identity for Hungarians. Again, I don't have a lot of personal experience with this, but I have also heard that people in the region might align more with the region than say with Hungary. And that is just, I guess, when you have a state border, and that makes your lived experience differ. So when Hungarians from Ukraine would be coming to Hungary, their experience would be differing just simply on the basis of they might have um, a different citizenship, they might get different treatment based on coming from a different place. So all of these things, I guess, would have an effect on how people identify as well. And that's also the case with Rusins, I assume, because, well, after being separated for so long by the Iron Curtain, and technically even the countries were part of the same bloc, at least in the Carpathian area, politically aligned for the Cold War era, but the border was closed between the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, for example. So the contact was completely shut. And now just these are in just de facto individual communities in each country that each has its own cultural context, references, and things. So even if it's, you do feel like you're interacting with the same people, there are also differences that come from just experiencing life in different countries.
Well, I feel that's almost our biggest weakness as Rusins as well, is that and compared to other communities, we're very scatterbrained. Prešov Rusins have a much different experience, not really connected to Transcarpathians. Lemkos are just off doing their own thing. Rusins in Romania, and of course we understand the reasons why for that. I just think that it's really hard coming up with ways to bring everyone on the same page, I would say. I think, would you agree there's a lot of internal fighting between different Rusin groups? Perhaps not fighting, but just, disconnect there. Because like I don't see very many Lemko Rusins really like, knowing what's going on in Transcarpathia. Let's be honest here. Lemkos are really just kind of doing their own thing in Poland. So
I think there is a disconnect. I'd agree with you on that one. But on the other hand, even if it is probably a weakness, I think there are some positives that could arise from that as well. Just Rusins being more emancipated in certain countries, even if they would primarily focus, I'd assume, on helping out their own community, it does boost up communities elsewhere. So I'd imagine if, for example, in Slovakia or Poland, Rusins weren't recognized as a separate ethnicity as it is in Ukraine, just everyone would be having a harder time in general working on cultural efforts. And one thing I can say that's positive about Lemkos is just the LemFM radio and website just acting as a sort of one of the few places that really tries to promote this inter-community contact. And just they regularly have news coming from various Rusin regions and countries. They have hosts from all different countries. So this is the thing that we need more of, and that's a very positive example, but I think there should be more communication and more projects in common, more spaces where you can cooperate.
Now, where do you see Hutsuls being in this sphere here? We've talked about this before off air, but this is a point where we don't agree with each other. So, just tell the audience your position on it, I guess.
Yeah, just the point we're disagreeing on is whether sort of Hutsuls are part of the same Rusin community or not. I would probably lean to a negative response. Well, just as a, obviously just from a perspective of someone who has linguistic training, it's clear that in the language it is very different, and the differences are quite striking. And from what I'm hearing in sort of other fields of life, there are also quite a few differences. And my understanding is, well, I don't know how correct it is, but that they at the same time as having differences to the Rusin groups to the west of them in Transcarpathia, they also have a lot of commonalities with Hutsuls in other regions of Ukraine, like the Ivano-Frankivsk region or Chernivtsi region. And I don't have a definitive answer on this, so I can't sort of claim to be the source of truth in this or anything. So I don't specialize in this topic either, but I would just, I guess I'm just trying to tread carefully in the sense that I wouldn't want to be also someone who would impose on other cultures. So I know that Hutsuls have their own cultural initiatives, even if the ones I know of are not based in Transcarpathia, but in Transcarpathia, the Hutsul community, from what I understand, isn't particularly big. So there aren't that many villages that are inhabited by Hutsuls. And just from a practical standpoint, the things I'm trying to do right now with regards to just making content in Rusin and stuff, and just all these projects that revolve around language emancipation, boosting the status of the language in the region. I don't know how useful it would be to them, since their language is quite a bit different. But either way, one way or another, I would really like to see their opinion and things produced by them as well, and for them to take a more active part, because again, my experience here is limited. I don't know people from that area enough to really have a fully formed opinion. So from what I've seen in existing Rusin language groups and just things that share the content, sometimes there are readers from that side, but it does seem to me that they have more of an outside perspective, because the sort of thing that's being talked about is quite unlike their language.
Well, I guess I'll lay out my position on it, and you can disagree with things. I think first thing is the language. I don't necessarily see that as a complete. I know you're not dismissing them or anything, but I'm just saying, like, I don't see it as a complete negative, because I mean, if we're going to apply this to Hutsuls, then we have to apply this to Pannonian Rusins, which their language is much different from Transcarpathia or Lemko. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's essentially a West Slavic language, but they're East Slavic people. So, I mean, that's a big thing right there, in that our community has some unique challenges in that regard, where I don't necessarily see the language part as being the biggest thing. I think second of all is that the Hutsuls in Romania are much more Rusin orientated than Transcarpathia. Now, that leads me to believe that you can say where pretty much those who believe that they're Rusin can be Rusin, or those who want to be something else, there's something else. But I think that it shows that there's that there's something there, in that I think it's mostly due to politics in a way for the Hutsuls in Transcarpathia, if the ones in Romania are so Rusin orientated. So I guess those are the two major things. And, just from personal experience talking, because I've had quite a few Hutsuls message me about all this, and, we talked about this before, but a lot of them that messaged me are Rusin oriented. Quite a few live in Usharod, but they're from the East, right? But, do you necessarily disagree with any of that? Do you think it's less important than what I make it out to be?
I think these are all fair, valid points. Just with regards to Romania, I've heard varying things about it. So as we talked about disconnect between different communities, like to me personally, at least, Romania is more of a black hole, just where I don't really have that much information about what's going on. So just aside from a few articles or just random sources here and there. But with language, that's a fair point as well. Sort of the only thing I have to add to that possibly is that in the case of Hutsuls and their language being different, the difference, I guess, with Pannonian Rusins is that there is a larger Hutsul community in other regions of Ukraine. So just when it comes to deciding on, where you draw the boundary and all, it's traditionally drawn in popular sources on the edge of Transcarpathia. So there would be just a question of, so Hutsuls in Transcarpathia would say be Rus, and Hutsuls outside of Transcarpathia would not be. And people have different opinion on that. So I've heard people claim that, we can sort of have community with all of the Hutsuls. And I think I don't dismiss that. So if that's people's opinion, I don't know how realistic it is and how much will there is to do anything of that sort. So just at the moment, currently, in practical terms, sort of the things we're doing, the content we're producing, it's more aligned to these sort of Rusin dialects in lowland Transcarpathia. So there might be possibly a need for people and speaking other Rusin dialects to join in as well, and that might or might not include the Hutsuls. So to me, that's an open question at the moment.
Well, I see them a little bit as like kind of the Gorals too, where kind of I wouldn't like, for example, I'm not even sure if the Hutsuls in Ivano-Frankivsk are Rusins. I mean, personally, I think I lean more towards no. I'm more just talking about the Hutsuls in Transcarpathia. But I think it's a little bit like the Gorals too, where the ones in Slovakia more oriented towards Slovakia, the ones in Poland more oriented towards Poland. But I think moving past that, I mean, what do you think? How do you think the last year has been from a Rusin community standpoint or just exposure standpoint?
No, I think it's been great, just because all of these projects on the internet have, I think, all started in the past year, which is just coincided really good. But it's also, I think it's useful that it's all starting in the same time frame, just simply because there's a lot of mutual help going on with regards to creating content, promoting content, and just building a community. So I feel quite good about it, because before the year had started, I was just a bit more alone in the sense that I was having some ideas about possibly doing something, but it was just me on my own. And now there's this big community that I'm a part of, and it's not just necessarily producing things, but even discussing anything, casual chat, practicing rusin, whatever, it's nice to have people that are part of that group.
And so would you like to talk about the Discord server, or it's up to you if you want to talk about it or kind of advertise what's about or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's open to anyone. I've not really tried advertising it because I think I don't particularly care about its growth, to be honest. I'd like it if people join, but if it stays small, I think it's also good. But in any case,
I agree on
anyone,
that. Yeah,
everyone is invited to join if you'd like. So what it is just a server where we casually chat, and a lot of the times it is about just some practical things, asking questions, answering questions, and whatever. But I think mostly it is just casual chatting, and you can meet a lot of the people we've mentioned there and practice rusin, whatever. It's just basically one of these platforms where you can meet people that are either rusin or interested in rusin things. And this platform specifically functions in English primarily, but that's not a strict policy or anything. So Discord links are a bit difficult to cite. So I think, I don't know if you can put it in the description or anything, or in the comments.
Yeah, I'll just put it in the description.
Yeah, but anyone's welcome to join. And
for sure. Yeah. All right. And I guess for the final question of the day, just kind of give us a little bit overview of what you plan in the future for you specifically. Stuff you're gonna make or stuff like you hope to make or things like that. Whether it be Rusin orientated or just. I mean, because your latest travel vlog was actually fantastic. I mean, for like a first video, like edited well. It was. I mean, it was good. So just overall, just give us a little sneak peek.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have quite a lot of ideas in my shelf for future videos, but it comes more to actually doing that and for stuff besides the videos. So the ideas are not in any shortage. It's just there are only so many hours in a day. But for now, I think the content that's upcoming and that's being in the works right now is more of the same casual things, travel things, life in Scotland, because that's not something people in Ukraine, which are my target audience for Transcarpathia, my core target audience, because I'm targeting it to everyone. It would be nice to tell Rusin people about the world and the world about Rusin people. But yeah, because it's not part of the Anglosphere, people don't know necessarily as much about life in the UK or Scotland. So for now, I think it would be more of that. And going forward, I think I would like to add some linguistic content. I had doubts about that initially, because just having maybe a more I wouldn't say professional, because I don't do it professionally, but just having university background in these issues, I don't think I'm very good at popularizing things necessarily, because when people make posts about, oh, Rusin has this grammatical feature and Rusin works like this, I'm just, well, yeah. That's not particularly surprising. I think the things that I find more interesting personally are maybe a layer below that, and that's not something I've shared so much in the past, but recently I've been more convinced that it's the internet, and even if it's something nerdy, there will be people who will be following that, and it can work. So there are some ideas of that sort as well that I'd like to do.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Tomash. We should do this again sometime. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me as well.